This guy said this is one of the biggest gaps between the best and second best player we've ever seen, talking about A'ja Wilson in the WNBA. And I'm confused because I'm seeing fans bring up Caitlin Clark. Like, don't get me wrong, she's really good, but she's barely the best guard in the league, let alone the best player in the league.
All the MVP candidates on points generated per game, points scored, points generated, and by assists. Now, as you guys can see here, Caitlin Clark got hurt at the beginning of this season, but she's doing this with only 31 games. So when we sit up here and say Caitlin Clark is not the greatest, at least right now, you're lying to yourself because she clearly is. The numbers don't lie.
Caitlin Clark is also first in the WNBA in total points created. She is first in the WNBA in points per game created. She is first in points per minute when she is on the court. Leads the league in assists per game, and she is also third overall in scoring this season.
A'ja Wilson is probably not going to enjoy this conversation. For most of the season, the MVP race looked like it had her name carved into the top spot with permanent ink, with trophy projections everywhere treating the crown like it already belonged to her and there was nobody close enough to seriously challenge it. That was the assumption for months. Wilson was the established superstar, the proven winner, the player everybody expected to eventually separate herself from the field. But something has changed, and this was not some tiny shift buried inside an advanced stat nobody pays attention to. The entire direction of the race has started moving, and it happened loudly enough that people who were not even willing to include Caitlin Clark in the discussion earlier this season are suddenly being forced to rethink everything.
It's A'ja Wilson, Olivia Miles,
Kelsey Mitchell.
can I get there?
Oh, my bad.
Kelsey Mitchell, Paige Beckers.
You hear in that clip, Aaliyah Boston jumps in as Candace is speaking and says, make sure that you say Kelsey Mitchell. Now, who Aaliyah Boston didn't mention, who Candace didn't mention, was Caitlin Clark. And this has obviously sparked up.
Caitlin Clark went from being treated like someone who might barely deserve a mention somewhere near the bottom of the top 5 to becoming one of the first names people are bringing up when they talk about who should actually win this award. And the wildest part is how she got there. There was no media campaign designed to convince voters. There was no endless press tour where she talked about being disrespected. There were no interviews begging people to recognize what she was doing. Clark simply kept showing up, playing basketball, producing at an absurd level, and allowing the numbers to build the argument for her. Week after week, the performances became harder to dismiss until eventually the conversation had no choice but to move in her direction.
Caitlin Clark just made WNBA history. 45 points, 10 assists, and the Indiana Fever beat the Seattle Storm. And this wasn't just a career night, it was record-breaking night. First player in WNBA history to record 40-plus points and 10-plus assists in the same game. Set a new Indiana Fever franchise record with 45 points. Added another historic milestone to a career that's already rewriting the record books. And she did it all while still on a minute restriction. When Caitlin Clark is healthy, she changes everything. The pace, the spacing, the energy, and nights like this remind everyone why she is one of the biggest stars the game has ever seen.
Go back to July and remember what WNBA players themselves said when they voted on the best guards in the league. Caitlin Clark somehow finished 11th. 11th. Not first, not third, not even somewhere comfortably inside the top 5. They put her behind 10 other guards, even though she was already outperforming several of the players listed ahead of her on a regular basis. Clark was 4th in scoring and 2nd in assists across the entire league, yet according to the opinions of her own peers, there were still 10 guards supposedly better than her. When the production on the court is screaming one thing, while the voting says something completely different, eventually somebody has to explain how those two realities are supposed to exist at the same time.
Caitlin Clark, on a vote by WNBA players, was voted the 11th best guard in the sport. At this point, I think it's funny. Fans ranked her 2nd, media ranked her 3rd, WNBA players voted her as the 11th best guard. Indiana's scoring 94 a game. It's the highest in 16 years. She's the #1 shooter, distributor, play initiator, playmaker. She's 11th. She's 4th in the league in scoring, 2nd in assists, and she's the 11th best guard. I mean, the animosity toward Caitlin Clark, it's so petty.
And that is the important distinction here. Finishing 11th in a player vote is not some objective measurement handed down by a computer. It is an opinion. And from the moment those rankings became public, the opinion looked difficult to defend. Players such as Kelsey Plum and Jackie Young were sitting around Clark in that same voting conversation, And even they would probably acknowledge that the difference between where Clark was ranked and where her actual production suggested she belonged was enormous. You could debate whether she should have been first, second, third, or fourth, but pretending 10 guards were clearly playing better basketball than her was never consistent with what was happening every night. The numbers were already making that ranking look questionable before Clark gave everybody an even bigger reason to reconsider it.
Caitlin Clark voted 11th best guard by WNBA players. That's crazy. I think people need to look at themselves in the mirror and realize, like, man, you got some insecurities if you sitting down and putting Caitlin Clark as the 11th best guard. Y'all need to go to a therapist and figure out what childhood issues you have. Because if you're sitting there and looking at yourself in the mirror and putting her as 11th best guard, and you're putting you as 8th best, like, come on.
Because what happened next was ridiculous. Disrespect has a funny way of becoming motivation. And Clark did not need very long to produce her answer. Roughly 2 weeks after that vote became public, she walked into a game against Seattle and erupted for 45 points and 10 assists, becoming the first player in WNBA history to produce a 40-point 10-assist performance in the same game. That was not simply another impressive night to throw onto a season highlight reel. It was something the league had never seen before. While voters were telling everyone there were 10 guards ahead of her, Clark was creating a statistical performance none of those players had ever produced. The timing almost felt scripted. The rankings came out, people debated whether Clark was being overrated or underrated, and then she responded with the strongest kind of argument an athlete can possibly make, a historic box score. No speech was required. There was nothing to spin, nothing to reinterpret, and very little anyone could say to make the performance disappear.
45 and 10. Can I interest you in that? From now on, Caitlin Clark, that's how you shoot. That's how you motherfucking shoot. 11 for 18, 6 of 10 for 3, clutch 3 after clutch 3. After everybody been on her fucking back, she came back and showed y'all she's the motherfucking one. Excuse my language, but I gotta say it because she ain't gonna say it, so I'll say it for her. Balled out tonight. Even when people are out there shooting shots when they should have been shooting the ball in the fourth quarter, she had 16 points and she was hot. Led the combat, down 6 in the fourth. Play after play, 16 points, 3 assists. She made every big play. This is what I'm talking about. When all the haters and doubters are talking about you and they coming at you game after game and you on a minute restriction and you score all those points in 29 minutes.
And that sequence has basically become the story of Caitlin Clark's entire season. People lower expectations, question whether she belongs in a certain conversation, or rank somebody else comfortably ahead of her, and then within a handful of games she makes the original criticism look outdated. We saw it happen with preseason projections. We watched it happen again when the guards were ranked. And now the same exact pattern is unfolding in the MVP discussion. A few months ago, Clark's name was barely included when people listed the serious contenders. Now those same conversations are beginning with her. She did not talk her way into that position. She played her way there, and every time somebody tried moving the goalposts, she added another performance that made those arguments harder to maintain.
Aaliyah Boston says Kelsey Mitchell is the MVP. A lot of people say it's A'ja Wilson, but Caitlin Clark is making this conversation very interesting. Why? Look at the numbers. Over her last 10 games, 24.7 points a game, 9 assists, and she's shooting 47% from the field and 41% from 3. That is an MVP level stretch. A'ja Wilson still has an incredible case. I mean, she's A'ja. And Kelsey Mitchell absolutely belongs in the conversation, but Caitlin Clark is making a late push that is getting pretty hard to ignore.
Now this is where things start becoming uncomfortable for A'ja Wilson. Because Clark is no longer simply hanging around the edge of the MVP race hoping voters notice her. She is pushing toward the front of it. Clark currently leads the field in points generated per game, total points scored and assists, putting her ahead of every other major candidate in those areas. Her own teammate Olivia Miles is sitting second, only 34 points behind her, while Kelsey Mitchell is also in that group. And then there is Wilson. Clark is ahead of her too. That alone deserves attention. But the detail making it even more impressive is how much basketball each player has actually played. Clark has logged roughly a game and a half less action than several of the players she is beating in these categories. In other words, the competition has had more opportunities to accumulate totals, and Clark is still sitting above them. She is producing more despite having less time available to produce it.
At some point, the talent is just undeniable. Y'all, Some of y'all that are not giving it up for Caitlin Clark, I just simply don't understand I don't know what you're watching. I heard Candace Parker and Aaliyah Boston giving their list for MVP candidates, and I did not hear Caitlin Clark's name. I did not hear Caitlin Clark's name. What is that about? WNBA Elite Offensive Impact, league rankings across key offensive metrics. Look at this, look at that first column. And you're telling me this is not an MVP candidate? Huh? Points per game, Caitlin Clark, third. Look at the rest of the column. Oh my goodness. Assists per game, first. Points created, first. Points per game create. How? If you want to say Asia Wilson is the MVP, I know Asia Wilson's very dominant. Olivia Miles having an outstanding. Wow. I mean, Kelsey Mitchell is a hooper. But for you not to even put Caitlin Clark on the list of MVP candidates, come on now, let's not do this, y'all.
Really think about what that means. Because leading a statistical category after playing every possible game is impressive enough. Leading while missing time is an entirely different challenge. Other players are getting additional quarters, possessions, and full games to increase their totals, yet Clark continues finding a way to stay ahead. At some point, you cannot keep calling that a lucky stretch or temporary heater. It starts looking like somebody performing at a different offensive level from nearly everyone around her. And the evidence goes far beyond one leaderboard. Clark is now fourth all-time among more than 850 guards in career points with 690, reaching a total most players spend years trying to accumulate. She also leads the league in made three-pointers, the most important spacing weapon in modern basketball, and the shot defenses have always feared most from her. But what should scare opponents even more is that her game is no longer dependent on that one area. Clark has already knocked down a career-high 32 mid-range shots this season, which is more than she made during her first 2 seasons combined. That is a massive development because it means one of the biggest holes defenses previously tried to exploit is disappearing in real time. Adding a reliable shot in the middle of a professional career is not easy. Players spend entire off-seasons repeating the same footwork, pull-ups and balance drills thousands of times, just hoping those repetitions hold up once a defender is flying toward them in a real game. Clark has clearly put that work in, and now defenders cannot simply retreat, protect the rim, and dare her to settle for something inside the three-point line. She has shown she can punish that coverage too. Then there is the statistic ESPN highlighted earlier this season. Clark generated more than 40 created points in a single game, the highest total by any player in WNBA history. That measurement includes what she scores herself along with the points she directly creates for teammates, which gives you a much clearer picture of her offensive influence than scoring alone. She is not simply hunting shots and piling up personal numbers. She is controlling entire possessions, forcing defenses to react to her decisions and making everyone around her more dangerous because the ball passed through her hands.
She's really breaking her own records now. Caitlin Clark is without a doubt having her best season as a pro, and she's on pace to make even more history. But you just gotta hear some of these crazy numbers. Let's start with the one that just makes no sense. There have been 120 20-point 10-assist games in WNBA history, right? CC has 19 of them in less than 3 seasons. She even has more than every other franchise except her own, of course. She has 9 20-point 10-assist games this season alone, the most by any player. Whose record did she beat? Her own from 2024. She became the fastest player in history to reach a combined 1,500 total career points and 500 assists. Caitlin's the only player in history to average at least 20 and 8 in a single month, and she's done it 5 times already. And she's on track to be the first to average 20 and 8 in a single season. Oh, and the Fever have been winning. They're now first in the East and 4th overall. They've won 7 of their last 9 games, winning by an average of 14 points per game. In the first game of that streak, CC had the game of her life. 45 points, 10 dimes, 4 steals, and 2 blocks. First in W history with 40 and 10 in a game. Put it this way, only 4 NBA players have notched a stat line like that in a single game. She's 3rd in scoring, she's tied for 1st in assists. So will CC catch Asia Wilson for MVP frontrunner and help the Fever make a...
Production like that does not appear randomly. It usually comes from a point guard processing the floor before everyone else has even realized what is developing. Someone who is already anticipating the second pass while defenders are still trying to react to the first one. Go back through Clark's film and you can see moments where defenders commit to movements that barely exist because she has already recognized their positioning and balance before they understand what she is planning. A hesitation, a glance toward a teammate, a slight change of pace, and suddenly the defense has opened the exact passing lane she wanted. Then add another piece to the argument. Clark has now been named Conference Player of the Week 4 different times this season. 4 separate awards across 1 year cannot be dismissed as one lucky 7-day explosion that everyone overreacted to. Receiving that recognition repeatedly means she has been producing at an elite level across different stretches of the season. Eventually, repetition becomes evidence, and when the same player keeps collecting honors while breaking records and climbing statistical leaderboards, voters cannot continue pretending the pattern is not obvious.
MVP is on the way, and y'all stay hating on the biggest. Matter of fact, we don't even say the biggest no more. We just say don't nothing get no bigger. Man, look, Caitlin Clark ranks top 3 in points per game and assists per game. Hear me out. This season, and is on pace to be the first player in WNBA history. In WNBA history, the first person, that means she's the first to do it, to average 20 points per game and 8 assists per game in a season. Mind y'all, she's top 3 in 2 of the top 3 categories, points, rebounds, assists. She's top 3 in 2 of them. I don't think nobody else is outside of one person who is probably the front runner for MVP.
Now bring A'ja Wilson back into the picture, because this is where the situation has to become frustrating for somebody who has spent years being treated as the league's unquestioned standard. Wilson has repeatedly carried herself with the belief that she has been the greatest since 1996, the year she was born, and that nobody is simply going to walk in and take her position. Given what she has accomplished, she has every right to possess that confidence. 4 MVP awards and 3 championships represent a resume almost every player who enters this league would dream about building. Nobody can erase what Wilson has accomplished. But there is one problem when we are discussing a current MVP award. Resumes describe what somebody has already done. An MVP race is supposed to evaluate what is happening now. And right now in this season, Caitlin Clark is producing numbers that are forcing everybody to compare the present instead of automatically rewarding the past.
Let's cut the shit for a second. A'ja Wilson is definitively the best player in the WNBA. She's just absolutely deadly as a mid-range jump shooter. She's just like clockwork, like 45, 46%. And then she can drive closeouts from that position about as well as anybody in the league, as you saw the play that iced the game. Just a simple rip through to the left, extend out, draw the contact, and finish off the glass. She's one of the best athletes in the league, one of the best mid-range shooters in the league.
That is what makes this Caitlin Clark story so fascinating. Imagine being A'ja Wilson, spending half a decade establishing yourself as the standard everyone else is measured against, then watching another player suddenly force herself into the same conversation through sheer production. Wilson still appears at the top of plenty of preseason lists, and many voters naturally entered the year viewing her as the automatic favorite. And to be clear, she is still doing things at an elite level. Wilson leads in scoring average and blocks, and those categories absolutely matter. Nothing Clark does changes that. But Clark's argument comes from how much she is generating across the entire offense while having fewer games to accumulate those numbers. More points created, more assists, historic individual nights, expanding efficiency, and a fever offense sitting at the top of the league in scoring. Clark has been central to building that attack over 3 seasons, and her fingerprints are everywhere. That is why the MVP discussion changed so quickly. Wilson did not suddenly become bad at basketball. Clark simply became impossible to ignore. The gap between the assumption people carried into the season and the reality unfolding on the floor became too large. Once voters begin reconsidering something they previously thought was obvious, it becomes extremely difficult to put the old narrative back together, especially when the player causing the change keeps producing new records every few weeks.
Now, when it comes to the MVP race, it's really only out of 2 candidates, and that's the Caitlin Clark and A'ja Wilson. And when you really sit back and look, the reason I say this is because A'ja Wilson is doing what she's doing, but Caitlin Clark is doing something we've never seen before, which she always does. But we've never seen a guard average over 20 while averaging over 8 assists. Over 20 points and over 8 assists. We've never seen it. And we also are a top 5 team, so you can't say anything about the record. And the players that y'all have above her, not on her level. So we can say Caitlin averages more points than Paige, averages like way more assists than Paige, and has the same or better record. So that automatically cancels out Paige.
And imagine how this looks now to the players who participated in that earlier guard ranking. They voted Caitlin Clark 11th at her own position, and now they are watching the same player sit near the center of the MVP race. Media members who once debated whether she even deserved a place among the top 5 candidates are suddenly publishing explanations for how she climbed into contention. That is a complete narrative reversal happening in the middle of the season. The people who questioned her now have to talk about her after games, on podcasts and inside locker rooms, because the performances keep dragging her name back into every major discussion. And there is another part of this story people rarely acknowledge directly. Clark had to overcome far more skepticism to receive this recognition than several of the players she is competing against. She was not simply installed as the obvious favorite before the season started. At different points, she dropped from 4th to 11th in certain rankings before the year even reached its midpoint. People wondered whether her shooting struggles were a warning sign, whether all the attention from her rookie year had started fading, and whether WNBA defenses had finally solved the problems she created. Instead of allowing those questions to define her season, Clark responded by becoming more complete. She developed the mid-range game, increased the pressure she created as a passer, and produced the most historic scoring performance of the year, all while logging fewer games than several of the players she is competing against.
I don't know if it's because Asia just been great for so long that, you know, what she doing has just been casually overlooked, but Asia Wilson is literally in her LeBron era. And what do I mean by she in her LeBron era? Like, Asia Wilson is at the point to where she damn near could win MVP every single year for the next 4 to 5 years if she wanted to, or if they gonna give it to her at this point. Now, the only difference between her and LeBron is not only is she winning MVP, but she also good enough to actually win the defensive MVP. Like, think about how dominant she actually is on both sides of the court. Like, the fact that they rely on her to be the #1 option on offense, and then at the same time, she's the main force and the anchor of the defense as well, too. She damn near the GOAT, because not only did she just pass 600 blocks in her career, and she the 6th player in WNBA history to reach that milestone, at the same time...
Compare that climb with the road Wilson entered this season on. Nobody was demanding Aka prove she belonged near the top when June arrived. There was no widespread discussion about whether she deserved to be considered a serious candidate. Her reputation had already answered those questions before the opening stretch of games. 4 MVP awards gave her an enormous amount of earned credibility, and most voters naturally expected the season to eventually finish with Wilson somewhere around the same position she has occupied for years. Clark entered from almost the opposite direction. She had to fight upward from a ranking that placed more than 10 guards around or ahead of her just to earn a seat in the same MVP discussion. One player began with recognition already attached to her name because of years of dominance. The other had to create enough evidence in a few months that ignoring her became impossible. That difference is exactly why Clark's rise feels different now from the earlier waves of hype that followed her into professional basketball. This is no longer just excitement surrounding potential. She is forcing recognition through production.
As of yesterday, she was the fastest player to reach 700 assists in WNBA history. Not just in WNBA history, but also NBA history as well. It took LaMelo Ball 104 games to reach 700 assists, and it took LeBron James 159 games to reach 700 assists. Caitlin Clark did it faster than the both of them. Caitlin Clark is also first in the WNBA in total points created. She is first in the WNBA in points per game created. She is first in points per minute when she is on the court. Leads the league in assists per game, and she is also 3rd overall in scoring this season. The stat that really stands out to me is the points generated per game. It's the amount of points that she is either scoring or assisting on, and that's really where Caitlin Clark is at her best. We've also seen that with the Indiana Fever. They've definitely turned a corner around midway through this season. They're finding their groove, and Caitlin Clark is a big reason for that.
There is a major difference between receiving the spotlight because everyone expects you to own it, and taking that spotlight because your performance leaves people no alternative. Wilson has spent years building one of the strongest resumes in the sport, and nothing happening this season can take those accomplishments away. But this year's MVP award is not supposed to be a lifetime achievement trophy. The question is who is doing the most right now during this specific season, while dealing with the pressure, expectations, and doubts surrounding them. When you examine points generated, overall scoring production, assists, improvement in efficiency, expanding offensive tools, and record-breaking performances, Caitlin Clark has built an incredibly strong case. There is also a much easier way to understand the contradiction without opening a spreadsheet. Ask how somebody ranked 11th among guards by her peers only a couple of months ago can now be the same player responsible for the most points created in a single game in league history, one of the leaders of the MVP field in scoring and assists, and a 4-time Conference Player of the Week. Something had to give. Either the early evaluation completely misunderstood what Clark was becoming, or she responded to that evaluation by elevating her game so dramatically that the ranking became irrelevant before the season was even finished.
She has to finish top 3 in scoring and #1 in assists per game. She has to finish with those two things, because no player in WNBA history has ever finished top 3 in scoring and led the league in assists per game. She would be the first to do so, and I honestly think she has a good chance of doing this with 9 games left. She's going to have to keep that up. So she's going to be looking for somewhere in that vicinity of 25 to 30 points per game is what I think she needs to maintain. And look, I think she's going to get there. I think she's easily 20 to 25 points per game right now.
Looking at everything currently sitting in the stat sheet, the answer appears obvious. So what does that mean for A'ja Wilson moving forward? It means she is still one of the most accomplished and dangerous players in basketball. But the position everyone assumed was secure before the season started suddenly feels less guaranteed every week. She is watching a player who has shared the WNBA spotlight with her for the last couple of years finally reach the point where the comparison is no longer about popularity, attention, or future potential. It is about the category that matters most in an MVP race: present production. Wilson can continue believing she has been the greatest since 1996, and considering everything she has accomplished, nobody should expect that confidence to disappear. But confidence and current box scores are not identical things, and right now Clark's numbers are creating an argument nobody can comfortably brush aside. If she continues performing anywhere near this level, there is no reason to believe she will simply disappear from contention when the season reaches its final stretch. Clark will not merely be somebody voters mention before eventually choosing someone else. She could become the first name everybody has to address when filling out that ballot. Whether those same people previously ranked her 11th, whether Wilson ever wants to publicly acknowledge the shift, and whether the rest of the league was prepared for Caitlin Clark to force her way to the front this quickly or not.